So, I'm going to say something that will possibly get me, stabbed by the majority of the Scream fandom. I am actually kind of glad that Sidney Prescott did not return for Scream 6. Hear me out. I previously made a whole video exploring whether the Scream franchise could continue without Sidney Prescott, especially given how she is an outlier in Final Girls, having appeared in every previous film in the franchise, something no other Final Girl has done. Through examining her run over those 5 films, I concluded that the franchise was ready to move forward and that Sidney had earned her happy ending, a statement that is ironically echoed in Scream 6. Sidney's line in Scream 5,
"No more books, no more movies, no more fucking Ghostface,"
felt final and worked to round out her character. I am aware that Sidney was originally meant to be in this film, and that the original script focused heavily on her character and ended up being extensively rewritten. But whatever was changed, moved around, and shifted ended up working. It moved the entire franchise forward, making room for the Carpenter sisters to truly take over the roles that they started to in the 5th film and shaping the movie around their characters. Scream 6 feels like both a natural continuation of the 5th film and a soft reboot of the franchise as a whole, starting with the change of location. While the franchise has previously moved outside of the original setting of Woodsboro, the settings have always remained relatively contained. Scream 2 was set in the relatively small setting of a college campus, and Scream 3 took place in the even more contained environment of a closed film set. The films always retained a small, intimate feel which linked the original trilogy together. With the 4th and 5th films returning to Woodsboro, so too did the small-town intimacy and the more controlled environment for Ghostface to work within. Moving the franchise to New York City, one of the most populated and fast-moving cities in America, gave the film a much more frenetic feel and really expanded the universe. It took the films out of their contained and more controlled environments and made it feel like literally no one was safe. For the first time, we see Ghostface rack up collateral damage and target individuals simply because they got in the way. In a truly chilling scene, we see the masked killer, who has previously only used blades, coldly execute a bodega owner with his own shotgun. The movie feels bigger, crazier, more integrated into the real world. It's a risky move, but it pays off and helps to push the franchise forward. More than the change in setting, the change in Final Girl, from Sidney to the Carpenter sisters, pushes the franchise into new territory. It should be noted that this shift was already happening in Scream 2022, with Sidney feeling more like a supporting character and Sam and Tara taking focus, particularly due to Sam's biological tie to Billy Loomis. The 5th film managed to set up the 2 Carpenter sisters and their characterization well, and this film builds upon that spectacularly. While I was always a fan of Sam, there were many within the fandom who found her characterization a little shaky in Scream 2022. They really cannot hold the same complaint with this film. Sam is a much stronger character here, overly protective of her younger sister, desperately trying to deal with her own trauma, and somehow becoming a shaky mother figure to both Tara and the Meeks twins. Her arc of learning to trust again and to let her sister go, something she literally has to do in the action-packed climax, is emotional, intense, and endearing. Sam retains her tough instincts from the first film, once again being the smartest person in the room when she decides to get the hell out of town the minute the murders start. However, a layer of trauma and anger is added, especially with the revelation that she's become the infamous center of a conspiracy theory which paints her as a murderer who framed the previous 2 Ghostfaces. The movie also applies this layer of trauma and anger to Tara's characterization, as we see her trying to move beyond the events of the first film without actually stopping to deal with them. Her fight back against Sam's overprotectiveness is both frustrating and relatable, and her new bond with Chad is organic, due to their shared trauma, and extremely sweet. We see Tara attempting to have a life and moving forward towards her future, but the film makes it very clear that repressing her trauma isn't working well, and the end of the movie sees her admitting that she needs to finally deal with her PTSD to truly move on. As the franchise has done before, this film delves into what happens in the aftermath of such horrific events, with a focus on how it can sometimes bring people together. The Meeks twins and the Carpenter sisters have clearly formed a trauma bond with one another, and the film takes the setup from the previous entry and builds on it, turning the four into a shaky little family which works surprisingly well. One of the strengths of the Scream franchise is the way the films go deeper with their characters than the average slasher, and strong dynamics have always been a part of the films, with audiences falling in love with friendships and romantic relationships alike. Showing the survivors of the previous films sticking together and trying to deal with everything as a team is incredibly endearing and helps to add to the emotional stakes of the film. Both Meeks twins get deeper development due to this bond. Mindy, already a great character in Scream 2022, is once again given the Randy role, which she fills perfectly, as she, and by extension the films, acknowledge that we are no longer dealing with mere sequels, but a franchise, and as such, we have new rules. Her scene with Kirby, in which the two test each other's horror movie opinions, is one of the most fun in the film and a genuine highlight. Chad, a somewhat thin character in Scream 2022, is given more depth and a very sweet bond with Tara, and he starts to feel a bit like the heart of the group, pushing them to understand one another and stick together. All of this characterization seemingly came about due to the fact that Neve Campbell didn't return, and therefore the movie couldn't be based around Sydney. And I honestly wonder how that would have worked had it happened, and if it would have felt like the franchise was moving backwards. As stated, Sydney's arc was very much complete in Scream 2022, and the way in which that film played out genuinely felt like she had passed the torch to the Carpenter sisters. There is so much setup for both sisters in the 2022 film that it would have felt very odd for the next film to suddenly switch its focus back to Sydney. The small mention that she receives in the film feels like enough and acknowledges her character and what she has survived. Sydney's absence is also made up for with the returning character of Kirby, a fan favourite since her first appearance and really the only great character to come out of Scream 4. Like all the other characters, Kirby gets some fun characterization and some reflection on her attack and time in Woodsboro. She was a clever pick to bring back, not just because she is so beloved by the fandom, but because she is a new enough character to not be considered nostalgia-driven, but also significant enough to be considered a legacy. She represents a bridge between the old and the new, which works. This film feels fresher, like we're finally moving forward and giving the franchise a new direction. Horror franchises must evolve, and while Scream has certainly done well sticking to its formula all these years, it feels best that the franchise change up before it gets stale. So much in Scream 6 feels like the new directors have realized this, and the way they are moving forward is fantastic. Everything about this film felt different, even while it retained its usual meta-commentary, iconic phone calls, and infamous mask. From the opening scene taking place in a busy bar with a no-name killer who was then disposed of himself, to the tension-filled subway scene in which our protagonists, and by extension the audience, feel the overwhelming paranoia of being lost in a sea of masks, we are constantly kept on our toes while being slowly introduced to this new world. The franchise feels like it's letting go of its Woodsboro roots, and with them, Sidney Prescott, and is reshaping itself around the Carpenter sisters. Through Sam and her connection to Billy, we feel like we're moving into a slightly darker realm, with a final girl who is maybe going to break some rules. Sam has several moments throughout the film where it is hinted that she really does have her father's darkness, and when she dons the mask in the final act, it is eerily comfortable, both for the character and the audience. How this will play out in the future, and whether it will affect her dynamic with Tara, who herself receives a startlingly dark and violent moment in the climax, gives us something to look forward to in the next film. And the fact that all four of the survivors from the previous film also made it through this film is not only a great subversion, but also sets the stage for a truly epic and emotional showdown in the final film. Scream 6 is a really fantastic example of how to move a franchise forward, but it wouldn't be the film it is without Scream 2022, which really did a fantastic job of transitioning the old out and the new in. The fact that this film was able to build on that and go even further demonstrates the love, care, and detail that the Radio Silence team are putting into the franchise, and the way they are moving it forward is truly fantastic, and gives hope that the final film will be a satisfying and exciting concluding chapter, which maybe might leave a few breadcrumbs for the future.